There's a gentleman on the phone now from Rhinebeck, New York, who tells us the truth whether we want to hear him or not. We invite him because this is an open forum for people with the ability to express ideas that are independent. Gerald Celente. Gerald is one of today's pioneers in trend strategy. He founded the Trends Research Institute in Kingston, New York. He is the publisher of the TrendsJournal that has been in publication for a long time, about 35 years. And he is accurate on so many of his predictions. Nice to have you with us today, Gerald.
Oh, thanks for having me, Gary. You know, I've used to be on Judge Napolitano's show, and we used to go out to dinner, etc. And he's exactly who he is, on the air and off the air. And you know, the voice of freedom doesn't ring very loud anymore in this country. If you don't toe the line, you're either with us or you're with the terrorists. And as now what we see going on, if you say anything bad about Israel, you're an anti-Semite. So not much has changed in either quarter.
Well, here's what we're going to do today, and I've set aside extra time for this. I'm going to lead into an area with some of the important insights from people who are not being recognized, but who I believe we should listen to what they have to say. We can accept or reject it, but we shouldn't intentionally self-censor ourselves. I'm going to begin with Israel, because that is something you just opened with, and I think it's important. And I'm going to begin by reading a letter. It's a short letter from Miriam Citrin, and here's what she has to say. Mariana Citrin. Horrors happen in the world, and we struggle to explain them and to fight to stop them. I learned this from my Jewish parents. I seek justice, but horrors happening in the name of those who have been historically oppressed, murdering people who have nothing, absolutely nothing, to do with that historical oppression, but using it as an excuse for murder, this is grotesque. We, the world, will no longer permit this lie. It must stop. This has zero to do with seeking justice for Judaism and all else. The world is imploring you, Israel. The world is demanding of you, Israel, stop. Stop the horror. Stop using our historical oppression to explain the horrors. We as Jews, organizing around the world, no longer permit you to use in our name, our identity as Jews, our historical oppression as a rationale for your warring and torture. We hereby take back the Jewish identity. You cannot speak or act in our name. I am sick every day. I fear the news and the images. I am so pained. I have trouble turning it on. Is that the intention behind the horror? That humanity is immobilized with shock? Celebrating the murders of babies, defending the murder of pregnant women, leaving them with nowhere to run when the bombs fall, shutting off people's water and electricity, hoping what? That they all starve or dehydrate? Who does that? It is so shocking that it makes one pause. Is it the pause that it is desired? That we, all over the world, just look on with our mouths open and chest in constant contraction? If that is the intention, it has been a success. Our collective mouths are agape in horror. Immobility, however, has not occurred. Quite the opposite. Millions of people around the world are in the streets and all over the internet crying, demanding and screaming for Israel to stop. One of the most increasingly vocal groups are Jews, organized as Jews, demanding an end to the massacre, taking back Judaism from Israel. I do not base my political organizing on my identity, not as a woman, a mother, a daughter, or a Jew. Or at least I did not used to do this. Now I must. I'm not alone. Hundreds of groups identified as Jews against the occupation and war have sprung up over the past few weeks all around the world, demanding that Israel not use our identity to wage murder, demanding that Israel stop. Many Jews feel that Israel is taking their Judaism and refuse to allow this. Many others, like myself, feel forced to identify as Jewish, taking back an identity rather than allowing to be used in the name of war, torture, and murder. And then it goes on from there. Then this is a separate piece. It is prominent Jewish leader This is very important. Boy, for those at Fox and on the right who, or the corporate left, either one, who refuse to look at the history of this conflict, the progenitor to it, this is an eye-opener. The article is entitled Prominent Jewish Leader, Israel Intentionally Massacred Civilians in 1948 to Terrorize the Population. From Washington Blog, quote, the targeting of civilians was started by Jewish terrorist groups. Henry Sigmund, an executive director of the American Jewish Congress, long described as one of the nation's big three Jewish organizations for 16 years. Sigmund, an ordained Orthodox rabbi, was also the head of the Synagogue Council of America and a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. Born in Germany 3 years before the Nazis came to power, his family had to move from place to place to avoid Nazi persecution. His father was a leader of the European Zionist movement that pushed for the creation of a Jewish state. Last week, Sigmund spoke about Israel war crimes at the very creation of the State of Israel. Quote, I'm quoting now, Israel had in its pre-state stage, several terrorist groups that did exactly what Hamas does today. I don't mean they sent rockets, but they killed innocent people, and they did that in an even more targeted way than these rockets do. Benny Morris published a book that is considered the Bible on that particular period. In the book, Righteous Victims, in which he said, I recall when I read it, I was shocked, in which he, particularly in his most recently updated book, which was based on some new information that the Israeli Defense Group had to open up and publish, that Israeli generals received direct instructions from David Ben-Gurion during the War of Independence to kill civilians or line them up against the wall and shoot them in order to help to encourage the exodus, that in fact resulted of 700,000 Palestinians who were driven out of there or forced to leave their homes, and their towns and their villages were destroyed. This was terror, even within not just the terrorist groups, the pre-state terrorists, but this is within the military, the Israeli military, that fought the War of Independence. And in this recent book that has received so much public attention, quote, Ari Shavit, he describes several such incidents too, and incidentally, one of the people who, according to Benny Morris, one of the people who received these orders, and they were oral orders, but he, in his book, describes why he believes that these orders were given to none other than Rabin, who was not a general then, but he executed these orders. He executed civilians, and the rationale given for this when Shavit, some years ago, had an interview with Benny Morris, and he said to him, quote, my God, you are saying that there was deliberate ethnic cleansing here? And Morris said, yes, there was. And he says, and you justify it? And he said, yes, because otherwise there would be no state of Israel. And Javits did not follow up. And that was one of my turning points when I saw that. He would not follow up and say, well, if that is justification to struggle for statehood, why can't Palestinians do that? In Israel, they made the heads of the two major pre-state terrorist groups prime ministers. So this distinction he's drawing is simply false. It's not true. The heads of the two terrorist groups, which incidentally, again, going back to Benny Morris in his book, Righteous Victims, he writes in this pre-state account that the targeting of civilians was started by the Jewish terrorist groups and the Arab groups followed. And Sigmund says that the slaughter continuing today, quote, when one thinks that this is what is necessary for Israel to survive, that the Zionist dream is based on the repeated slaughter of innocents on a scale that we're watching these days on television, that is really a profound, profound crisis and should be a profound crisis in the thinking of all of us who were committed to the establishment of the state and to its success. It leads one virtually to a whole rethinking of the historical phenomena, end quote. And finally, to this. This is a quote, Gerald, from the newspaper, the leading newspaper, Zionist's Haaretz in 1943, quote, Zionism and Judaism is not one thing but two different things. and of course two contradicting one another. Zionism starts at the place where Judaism is destroyed. One thing is certain, Zionism is not a continuation or healing of wounded Judaism, but rather an uprooting, end quote. And then finally, for those who want to see what the head of Israel, David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel, considered, these are his direct quotes. Quote, "We must use terror, assassination, intimidation, land confiscation, and the cutting off of all social services to rid the Galilee of its Arab population." Quote, "If I could save all the children of Germany by bringing them to England, or only half to Israel, I would choose the second." End quote. So here is my question to you. Are we capable, as a world, as a nation, to understand the nature and history of this conflict and to seek ways of keeping both the Jewish population safe and the ability to live in a non-state of fear, and the Palestinian people free and safe to live without restrictions and where they can determine their own quality of life? Is that possible? And if not, why? And why have we not looked at the true history of this conflict?
Well, in the last question, and then going back to the solution, why have we not looked at it and for what it was? First of all, if you criticize Israel, as I mentioned, you're called an anti-Semite. That in itself is disingenuous, since you also mentioned Zionism, which was the father of Zionism is Theodor Herzl, who is from Budapest, the eastern part of Hungary. When you look at every one of the Israeli prime ministers, Golda Meir, Ben-Gurion, you go up and down the list to Netanyahu, Sharon, everyone, Perez, Begin, everyone are all Ashkenazi. They are not Semites. They are Eastern Europeans. When you look at when all this began, it began in the late 1800s going into the 1900s, when there was massive colonialism going on from Europe. The Portuguese, the Dutch, the Spanish, the French, the English. They were colonizing the entire region, including Africa. This is nothing more than a colonization. It's no different than Spain going to a country, conquering it to bring religion to the pagans and making up any story that they wanted. They've made up this story. The story was, the truth of the story is, yes, they were slaughtered by the Nazis. The fabrication of the story is, what are you doing in, a country so far away from you? Well, God gave us that. Well, God wasn't a real estate agent, and the Bible isn't a land deed. So the reason we can't see the truth behind it is because of the propaganda. Full-page ads run in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, papers throughout the world by Elie Wiesel, the Nobel Peace Laureate. Jews reject child sacrifice 3,500 years ago. Now it's Hamas's turn. More than 1,000 years ago, Abraham had 2 children. One son had been sent into the wilderness and was in danger of dying. God saved him with water from a spring. The other son was bound, his throat about to be cut by his own father. But God stayed the knife. Both sons, Ishmael and Isaac, received promises that they would father great nations. With these narratives, monotheism and Western civilization began, and the Canaanite practices of child sacrifice to Moloch are forever left behind by the descendants of Abraham, except they are not. In my own lifetime, I have seen Jewish children thrown into the fire, and now I have seen Muslim children used as human shields, in both cases by worshippers of death cults indistinguishable from that of the Molochites. I call upon President Obama and the leaders of the world to condemn Hamas's use of children as human shields. To call this guy a Nobel Peace Prize winner is like calling Obama one after starting the Libyan war. To equate this with Hamas using people as human shields, I mean, here are the facts. The facts are, how many UN schools and shelters did Israel bomb, knowing that they had the coordinates of where they were? 7. And let us say, I do not agree with it, because Gaza Strip is only 7 miles wide by 25 miles long, with 1.8 million people jammed into it, that they're using these people as human shields, considering the massive destruction of several thousand houses and another 10,000 destroyed. So we'll say, though, we'll go with Eli here, and let's say they're using them as human shields. Okay, if you know they're using them as human shields, you're going to kill them anyway? How come nobody's asking that question? We have 1,900 or more dead Palestinians. Oh, you've seen them thrown into a fire, babies in Auschwitz? What's the difference if you bomb them to death or burn them to death? You're dead, you're dead. So the hypocrisy going on, and then coming out from all of the media. I even heard this guy, Jake Tapper, on CNN in the beginning of the crisis, saying that the Muslims and these kind of people enjoy being martyrs, or words to that extent. You look what's going on now, coming out of Hollywood. They have this guy, Ryan Kavanaugh, who's a studio head, and it's in the Hollywood Reporter, and he's condemning this Javier Bardem and Penelope Cruz, who accused Israel of committing genocide. And he goes on to say, as a grandson of a Holocaust survivor, I know that anyone calling what's going on in Israel genocide versus self-defense is either ignorant or shouldn't be commenting or is truly anti-Semitic. So this is the narrative. It makes his blood boil. Okay, fine, good for you. We're all stupid. You only know what's going on. As that person who wrote you the letter made the point, they are equating Judaism with Israel. Israel is a country that's run by politicians. It has nothing to do with Judaism, just as America has nothing to do with Christianity. So you have to really separate the two. Is there a solution? I believe there is. And I believe that solution is a one-state solution. If everybody wants to continue to call Israel the only democracy in the Middle East, let's make it a democracy. It's simple. Pull down the walls. Take down the barriers. Make it an equal state if you want to call it a democracy. So that's my solution to it.
All right, let's go on to another issue here. The latest report from a group of scientists are talking about, quote, scientists observe methane mega flare. Quote, an international team of scientists aboard the icebreaker Odin, currently north of eastern Siberia in the Arctic Ocean, is working primarily to measure methane emissions from the Arctic seafloor. Only a week into the voyage, the team reported, quote, elevating methane levels about 1,000% higher than background seawater. And it's a potent greenhouse gas. And they're saying that they're now seeing plumes coming off the seafloor, and that there are thousands of these plumes. Well, this is a massive amount of methane gas that is escaping because of global warming. Why aren't we paying attention to what is happening with the melting of the permafrost in Siberia and the boreal forests in Canada? Because all this is increasing global warming.
Well, as you well know from the TrendsJournal, climate change is one of the major stories that we did in this edition. The reason why they're not paying attention to it, again, look who's running the government. You have a gang of 535 congressmen and senators in total telling us how to tie their shoes, and they're all paid off by the industries. Look where they get their money from. And it's just as what's going on. I mean, as we're talking about what's going on in Toledo, where 500,000 people can't drink their water. Oh, now the mayor took a glass of it, so he says it's safe. You know, so he's going to be drinking that all the time. But where is it coming from? Well, all of the fertilizer runoff going into the lake that's creating the algae. Look at the trillions of tons of poisons that they're pumping into the air, into the water, and into the earth. Is it going to have an effect? Well, we need more scientific studies. Look what they're doing to our food crop with GMOs. Look what the people look like. Oh, by the way, quick story. We had a conference this past week up here in Colonial Kingston, History Before It Happens. People came from all over the world, Japan, Australia, Italy, Switzerland, London. And anyway, one person that came is a Catholic priest, and he heard me on one of the shows, and he heard me talking about how things could change. And I said, people have to find their dignity, courage, and self-respect. He said those words stuck in his mind, and he started looking me up, and then he saw me on a link with you. And he's been following you, and he's lost over 100 pounds. He said he was ready to crash and burn, and that he changed his life around. And he's so much more effective in the work that he's doing. And so I said, I know Gary, no. I said, yeah. I said, he's a great guy. He said, no, he really changed my life. So I just wanted to pass that on to you.
Thank you.
And so why aren't people doing anything? Because they're not stopping wars, Gary. You think they're going to try to stop global warming or climate change? Everybody is, not everybody, but a large majority of the population, they're just stuck. They're afraid to move in either direction. They've lost faith in themselves. They lack the courage. So, yeah, anything could happen. They're not going to do anything to prevent this, just like they're leading us to war. They're destroying our economy. You think they're going to fix something like the environment?
Next issue. We currently have thousands upon tens of thousands of SWAT team raids. We have hundreds of thousands of police actions, frequently against innocent civilians who've done nothing. Everything from a woman in a shower, when the police barge in, New York City police, and drag her out, they got the wrong apartment, but they didn't apologize. They took her down naked, drag her in the hall. We have a woman who did nothing being shot and killed. We have people being killed, tasered. We have a man in a courtroom who's talking with a judge, and suddenly he's completely shackled, feet and hands, and suddenly the guy just comes up and beats the hell out of him, one of the guards. The judge doesn't say a word. So we're seeing now something that many people are concerned and frightened about, not just the militarization of the police, but so many police acting sociopathic and getting away with it. Their unions protect them, the other officers protect them, the courts protect them. They literally can kill with impunity today. Your thoughts?
Well, you said it, sociopathic. The fish rots from the head down. Look what what's the big deal about police killing when a whole nation wages immoral wars and slaughters millions? So all they're doing is following their leader. I mean, you saw what happened when the Iraq conflict. I hate that word, by the way. You see, I used it because of the knee-jerk reaction of seeing in the media all the time. These aren't conflicts. These are massacres. And you saw with the Iraq massacre, 1 million people, and now it's heating up again, and they rolled out the criminals in charge of doing it, such as people like Dick Cheney. And he's being featured on all the media defending their actions. So you say to yourself, as you look at it, well, if they can do it, I can do it. This is what it's become. And then, of course, we know that as part of the military cyber industrial complex, that they've taken all of this worthless machinery that we've spent trillions of dollars on in equipment, military equipment, and now they're reprocessing it into the police. And we have, again, another major story in the current Trends Journal written on the militarization of the police forces in the United States by Dr. Paul Craig Roberts. And by the way, I want to make this very clear. There is no one that I respect more for geopolitics and economics than Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, and his site is paulcraigroberts.org for people that want to see more information about it. So as we look at it, this is all of what's going on. The entire nation has a war on terror. The war on terror is the war on the people. Again, it was started at the top. That the fish rots from the head down is more than just a metaphor. It's a fact. You follow your leaders. They set the agenda, and that's what it's become, and that's what Judge Napolitano was saying when you played that piece about how now the military could take over police duties. We saw it with the Boston Marathon murders. They closed down an entire city. They went door to door without any search warrants. You saw it happen. This is called, by the way, you see, all of these pieces, Gary, are connected. You go back to the Panic of '08, for example, when all of a sudden we had to bail out banks because they were too big to fail. In capitalism, there is no such thing as too big to fail. In fascism, however, that's called the merger of state and corporate powers. So by all of their deeds, it adds up to America has become a fascist state.
Final thought. You and I discussed at some length in previous programs that the BRIC nations, and as opposed to the American concept, were going to be trading in the near future in their own currencies and enhancing that with 22 countries in Central and South America beginning to trade in their own currencies and getting away from the dollar as a reserve currency. Where do you see the dollar going? Where do you see, and by the way, you and I were both right. There's now official lawsuits where banks were artificially manipulating the price of gold and silver. That's why it's been held down. Those should be much higher than what they are. But now they're in court, and now the truth of it's going to come out, and we will show that we were right. Gold should be around $50 an ounce. So gold should be at about $3,000 an ounce. Silver should be about $50 an ounce. And that's before the dollar no longer has a reserve currency status. What do you see with the dollar as the reserve currency and the value of gold and silver?
Again, it's all tied together. What's going on now, for example, with the sanctions against Russia, that is accelerating the risk to dollar dominance. Because what's going on now is that the Russians are taking their money and they're putting it into Asian banks. You look at the dollar's share of global reserves, Gary, has shrunk to, it's about 60% now from 72% in 2001. And by the way, sanctions are acts of war. So now you're going to start seeing more and more of the Asian nations, Russia, and the BRIC nations, as they already have at the last meeting in Brazil. By the way, it was the same time when Putin was flying back from Brazil, and that missile or whatever took down that Malaysian plane over Ukraine. They actually crossed paths almost at identical times within inside of 2 minutes. What they did at that BRIC meeting is they set up in Shanghai it's going to be a new central bank for the BRICS. When the dollar loses its reserve currency status, this is going to be the official end of Empire America. It will no longer be able to print money to wage wars and to keep its economy afloat because people aren't going to be buying its paper. And when you mentioned about gold and silver being manipulated, and there are lawsuits, let's be adults about this. We know it's a fact, proven. This is not a conspiracy theory. The fines were paid. They rigged the Forex markets. Those are the currency markets being traded every day at the tune of $5.3 trillion. The LIBOR rate, that's right, the interest rates that we all pay on mortgages, cars, student loans, etc., totally rigged to the tune of, by the way, by the time they found it, around $700 trillion. We know the stock markets are rigged with the black pools, the algorithms, and the high-frequency trading. So, of course, gold and silver are rigged because it all goes back again. If the currencies are devalued for the level that they should be at, people will be pouring out of them, going into gold, and the dollar loses its value, as does the euro, the pound, and other currencies that are just built up on printed money. So they don't want people to go into gold or silver.
Gerald Celente, nice to have you on today. We look forward to the next trends, and we'll also look to see how accurate you are on all these, because you have been hitting over a 90% accuracy rate on all your major predictions. Gerald, thank you for being with us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, and keep up the great work. A lot of people love you, Gary.
Thank you. And Gerald can be reached at the publication, the TrendsJournal, and TrendsResearch.com. I'm Gary Null. We're out of time. Thank you for listening.